my question is, in designing a global structure for the world, these institutions like the world economy, the world financial system, the international tax system, and so on, what should be our principles guiding that structuring of the world? And here I'm saying, if you are really a Rawlsian, which I'm really not, but if you are a Rawlsian, you should again emphasize the position of the worst off. We want whatever influence the global institutional order has on the world to be influence that favors the bottom position, that raises the bottom position as much as possible. And so that would be what I think a consequential Rawlsianism would imply at the global level.
So why did you, normatively or philosophically, how did you come up with that statement? How's your process of argument that that kind of war will be better than maybe Trump wants a very unequal world? What's the argument behind all this?
Yeah, the argument is, I mean, again, my work is really is a two-track work. A lot of the work that I've done is simply within the Rawlsian enterprise. So I'm saying, if you accept Rawlsian kind of approach, Rawlsian normative thinking, then you have to work it out in the correct way. You have to follow the argument to where it leads. So on that inside track, I would simply say I accept Rawls's argument, the original position, the two principles of justice, the focus on the least advantaged, and so on. And I'm applying that argument internationally. Now, of course, somebody can say, but internationally, there are many different cultures, they have different considered judgments, different intuitions. All that is true. But if we are, as US people, if we are convinced by the Rawlsian type of normative content, then we should be willing to take that normative content also to the global level, right? Or at the very least, if you want to have a different theory domestically and globally, then the burden of proof is on you to explain why not. That was my challenge, right? So if you are a Rawlsian domestically, you have to explain to me why you don't want to be a Rawlsian, have the same demands on international or supranational structures as you impose on domestic structures. Now, from the outside, I would not be as confident that the full menu of Rawlsian ideas should be globalized. And the reason, of course, is cultural diversity, right? So some of the considered judgments that Rawls relies on for his theory are ones that are not deeply entrenched in other cultures. So what I would say in my own voice at the global level is we should have a more minimalist theory of global justice, something like a theory that requires that global institutions must be designed so that all human needs are met. Some people would say human rights, some people would say human needs, some people would say capabilities. It's all the same thing, more or less. There are certain basic things that every human being should have, and any global order that avoidably fails to provide that, to ensure that for people, is morally defective. That was my main claim in the book, World Poverty and Human Rights.
Yeah, thank you. So can I understand in this way is like there should be no hypocrisy. There should be no exceptionalism. Because what Trump is pushing, and I think for a lot of American presidents were pushing, like maybe not so explicitly, is like, I want it one way in America because we are a guided city by the God. We are a provided city by the God. But on the international, we will do whatever it takes to make sure we have that kind of exceptionalism on the states.
Yeah.
So if Trump is saying like, I will be a good student of Rawls on the states only because it can only happen after we achieved international hegemony, after we exploit all the other countries to ensure we can be just domestically. How would you argue against that?
Yeah, so this is very good what you're saying, first of all, and very, very much to the point. So philosophically, there is a double standard. That's how I would call it.
Yes.
And it is that double standard that I was attacking. But I talked many, many, many hours with Rawls after I finished my PhD. And this exceptionalism that you bring out was deeply ingrained in him. He was not just a philosopher, he also studied history a lot. He was a great admirer of Abraham Lincoln, for example. And he had a very fundamental emotional belief that America, for all its faults, for all the terrible things it has done, America will always, in the end, come out on the right side. And that is not true of Germany, that is not true of Russia, that is not true of France. There is no other place that you can rely on to find the way forward. So he was very much against the Vietnam War, and he understood how horrible that war was, how many millions of people it destroyed and killed. He was not a person who didn't accept that. He acknowledged that, he understood that. But he said, look, we overcame it. The United States rid itself of Nixon, of that war, and we, in the end, after a long struggle, we managed to move forward. And what he would say now about Trump is, of course, is another question, right? Yeah. But he would have thought, maybe there can be something like fascism in America, maybe that can arise, but it will be defeated. He was a real optimist about America, and maybe understandably so, given how he grew up and given the experience, the historical experience of America in that period. And if you think now from the present point of view, if we have hope for the future, where do we place that hope? What is the progressive force in the world that can make sure that we survive the next century and can take humanity forward in a peaceful, harmonious way? I would say China is much more likely to succeed in that task, and I think that we would be in real deep shit if we didn't have China at this point. But that's not a view that Rawls would share, I think. Rawls would, if he were still alive, would probably think that just wait. Trump is horrible, but just wait and America will get it right again.
Yeah, I think that kind of thinking is pretty much rooted in the generation of American who has been through World War II. The American was portrayed as the big savior of the mankind, more or less, I would say. But like when they do that, they exclude Soviet Union on that narrative. So
and they also exclude a lot of what they did in the Second World War. The history is very one-sided,
So you were saying like if we need a rewriting of the global order to achieve a more just world, we will need, like you say, institutional changes instead of like I was saying, I was mistaken. Like you cannot just helping out others. There is one saying in China is like if you give one a fish, he will survive for 1 day. But if you told him fishing, he will survive for the rest of his life.
But this is not the right analogy either, because it's not. We are not giving a fish. We are not teaching how to fish. We are changing the economic structure. So, for example, we are creating schools so that every child in China can go to school. Right? We make sure that the children who go to school get meals in school. Every child on every school day gets a meal. That is structural change. And that is what moves the country forward, right? Because if you teach a person how to fish, you are still just dealing with one individual person. You are the savior, the rich person giving the poor person some skill or something like that. This is a higher level thing where you fundamentally change the whole structure. So instead of having some people who are the landowners and other people who are maybe taught by the landowner how to fish, you change the whole structure so that everybody can be a landowner, or that maybe land isn't privately owned,
Yes.
but so it's that this is really Marxism in a way, or a Marxist approach to what really we need to achieve in society. We need to restructure it.
So you have envisioned these kind of institutional changes in so many ways. Like you have proposed this idea of global resource dividend and the health and ecology impact fund. Could you explain to our Chinese audiences what exactly do you envision in those programs?
Yeah, these ideas, they bring out that, often when we look at the world, we take its fundamental features for granted.
Yes.
And what I try to do is step 5 steps back and say, it could be very differently organized. So let me start with the global resources dividend, right? Resources are the fundament of the entire economy, right? Without resources, you cannot do anything.
Yes.
So you need minerals, you need energy and all this stuff. Now, these resources are currently said to belong to the countries. Yeah, where they are. And that, you might say, should be challenged, right? Why should a country, simply because it happens to be in a certain location, why should it own all the oil or all the copper that is in that location? So, but the fundamental problem is that in our world, these resources are exploited by elites. So the Saudis sit on the oil, and it gets refined, it gets sold to Exxon or to Shell, and elites are using these resources, and the benefits go to the shareholders of Exxon, to the Saudi elite, but 99% of the world's population see nothing from these minerals. And what I was proposing with the global resources dividend is to say, look, at the very least, let 3% or 4% of the value of all the natural resources in the world be used to give to the poorest people. Let them be the co-owners of these resources. Let them be entitled to a share of any resources that are extracted. And if you think about it, that would obviously be a much, much, much more just arrangement.
Yes.
But we always take for granted that the resources, of course, they belong to the country where they are found. And I'm challenging that. So I designed that in great detail, a $300 billion a year global resources dividend, which would essentially erase all poverty in the world. It would be enough at that time with those dollars to completely eradicate poverty. And it would essentially just raise the price of goods that have resources in them a little bit. The gasoline at the gas station would be a little more expensive and so on. And poor people would participate in resource exploitation.
But those prices already rigged. So even if we don't have that kind of dividend, the price is also rigged by the ultra rich.
Of course.
So and what about the health and the ecology?
The Health Impact Fund. Yeah, that's another one of the arrangements that we have in the world. This one is new. It was put in place in 1995 when the WTO was founded, the World Trade Organization. And part of that treaty that founded the WTO was the TRIPS agreement, which stands for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. It's an agreement that commits every country in the world to issue 20-year product patents on innovations. So you're required to give these patents and you're required to enforce them. And that means if a new medicine is developed, and these medicines are expensive to develop, so they are developed in countries like Switzerland, the US, Japan, never in poor countries, then the innovator of that medicine can patent it around the world and can sell it at a very high price because, of course, people want to live, they want to have to buy the medicine. And often the price that you pay for the medicine is 1,000 times or 3,000 times higher than the cost of production. So before TRIPS, Indian pharmaceutical companies, so-called generic companies, they would mass produce medicine at a very, very low price and sell it. So every new medicine was available to Indians and available all around the developing world at very low prices. TRIPS cut that off, and now the medicine reaches only 5 or 6% of the global population. For example, sofosbuvir, which is a recent medicine against hepatitis C, it is now on the market maybe for 10 years. It is reaching 5 or 7% of the people who need it because of the high price. So again, I'm saying this is a terrible system. Is there a better way? And I'm saying, yes, there's a better way. Of course, you have to reward the people who invest in developing a new medicine, but you don't have to reward them by giving them a monopoly.
Yes.
You reward them by giving them a reward that is proportioned to the health impact of their innovation. The more people take my medicine, the more they benefit from taking my medicine, the more money goes to the inventor of the medicine. That's the much better system, the health impact fund system. So again, my objective is to say we could arrange things very differently in a way that is still feasible, works, incentivizes pharmaceutical research, but at the same time makes the fruits of that research available worldwide to everybody, rich and poor.